"Who is the student by the window?" Matteo Romano asked before he even looked at the woman he had come to meet. The maitre d' followed his gaze across Bella Vita, one of Manhattan's most exclusive Italian restaurants, toward the quieter cafe section near the front windows. "I believe his name is Owen Parker, Mr. Romano. He studies here sometimes after work." Matteo said nothing. At 34, he had spent most of his adult life learning how to enter a room without being distracted by anything inside it. Tonight was supposed to be particularly simple. His aunt had arranged a blind date with the daughter of an influential family, and Matteo had agreed to stay for 20 minutes purely to stop receiving weekly phone calls about his personal life. Then he had seen Owen. The 22-year-old Omega sat alone beneath a brass reading lamp with an old laptop, 2 architecture textbooks, and a paper cup of coffee beside him. His dark jacket hung over the back of his chair, and a worn backpack rested against one leg. Nothing about him belonged to the polished world surrounding Matteo. That might have been why Matteo noticed him. Or perhaps it was the concentration on Owen's face as he studied a complicated building diagram, completely unaware that the most feared alpha in the restaurant had stopped walking. "Your table is ready, sir," the maitre d' said carefully. Matteo finally looked away. Of course. His blind date, Vanessa Caldwell, arrived 3 minutes later. She was intelligent, composed, and perfectly pleasant. Under any other circumstances, Matteo would have given the conversation his complete attention. He asked about her work, listened to her answer, and responded politely. Yet his eyes kept drifting toward the window. Owen never looked back. That was unusual. People usually noticed Matteo Romano. Some recognized the expensive suit and assumed wealth. Others recognized the Romano name and immediately became cautious. In certain circles, nobody needed an explanation. Matteo managed legitimate family businesses across New York, but the Romano organization carried another reputation beneath the respectable surface, one inherited through generations of an Italian-American family whose influence reached far beyond restaurants and real estate. Owen appeared interested in none of it. He was calculating something with a pencil. 10 minutes into dinner, an elderly customer leaving the cafe dropped a folder near Owen's table. Papers scattered across the floor. Owen immediately closed his laptop and crouched to help. "I have them, sir," he said. The older man apologized repeatedly. "You do not have to do that. It is fine. I needed a break from structural calculations anyway." Owen gathered every page, checked beneath 2 nearby chairs, then handed the folder back without expecting thanks. Matteo watched the entire exchange. "You seem distracted," Vanessa said. Matteo returned his attention to her. Lying would have been disrespectful. "I am." Vanessa followed his gaze and understood faster than he expected. "The student?" Matteo raised an eyebrow. "Is it that obvious?" "Only because you have looked over there 6 times. Matteo almost smiled. 7. Vanessa laughed softly. "Then perhaps this blind date has already accomplished something useful. I owe you an apology. You owe me honesty. Those are different things." Matteo respected her immediately for saying it. "There is no excuse for wasting your evening." "Then do not." Vanessa finished her water and stood. "Go find out his name." "I already did." She stared at him for a second, then laughed again. "Matteo, this might be the shortest blind date in Manhattan history." After Vanessa left, Matteo remained seated. He could negotiate contracts worth millions without hesitation. Yet walking 15 feet toward one university student suddenly felt strangely complicated. Owen began packing his textbooks. Matteo stood. Before he could cross the room, Owen slung his backpack over one shoulder and headed toward the coat check. Matteo followed several seconds later. Owen reached for his jacket at the exact moment Matteo stepped beside him. Their eyes met for the first time. Owen glanced at Matteo's perfectly tailored suit, then at the nearly empty dining room behind him. "Did your date abandon you?" Matteo had expected recognition, nervousness, perhaps silence. He had not expected that. Something like that. Owen smiled. "That bad?" Matteo looked at him for a long moment. "Actually, I think the evening just became much more interesting." Owen studied Matteo for a second, clearly deciding whether the stranger beside him was joking. "More interesting than dinner with someone who looks like she owns half of Manhattan?" he asked. Matteo glanced toward the restaurant. Vanessa would probably appreciate that description. So she really left? "We agreed the evening was not going anywhere." Owen accepted his jacket from the attendant. "That sounds unusually civilized for a bad date." "Disappointed?" A little. I was hoping for overturned water glasses. Mateo smiled. I am afraid you missed the excitement. Owen slipped into his jacket and adjusted the worn strap of his backpack. Then I should probably go home and finish my assignment. Mateo could have let him leave. Normally, he would have. Instead, he asked, Architecture? Owen glanced at the textbooks visible inside his bag. Good detective work. I noticed what you were studying. You were watching me? The question was direct, but not frightened. Mateo chose his answer carefully. I noticed you. Owen lifted an eyebrow. That sounds slightly better. Would coffee make it sound less suspicious? Owen looked toward the cafe counter, then at the clock above the entrance. I have about 30 minutes before I need to catch the subway. Mateo gestured toward the cafe. 30 minutes. They returned to the window where Owen had been studying. Mateo expected a server to approach immediately, but Owen picked up his paper cup. I already bought coffee. That cannot still be warm. It costs $6. I am emotionally committed to finishing it. Mateo laughed before he could stop himself. Owen looked surprised. You do laugh. Occasionally. Good. You looked extremely serious at dinner. Mateo sat across from him. You were watching me too. Everyone was watching you. That answer caught Mateo's attention. Why? Owen shrugged. The staff straightened up when you walked in. The manager came out of his office. Two guys near the bar suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to look. Mateo leaned back. And what did you conclude? Rich family. Important job. Possibly terrible personality. Possibly. The investigation is ongoing. Mateo smiled again. For the next half hour, they talked about almost nothing Mateo would normally discuss with a stranger. Owen was studying architecture at a university in Manhattan and worked part-time at a bookstore near campus. He liked old train stations, hated group projects, and had chosen architecture because buildings could make people feel either welcomed or excluded before anyone said a word. Mateo found himself asking questions simply because he wanted the answers. When Owen finally checked the time, nearly 40 minutes had passed. I missed my train. Mateo glanced at his watch. I thought they ran frequently. They do. I am blaming you on principle. I can have a car take you home. Owen immediately shook his head. No, thank you. Mateo was not accustomed to offers being refused so quickly. It is late. It is Manhattan, not the wilderness. I was trying to be helpful. Owen softened slightly. I know, but I can get myself home. Mateo nodded. Fair enough. Owen stood and lifted his backpack. You never told me what you do. Mateo paused. The complete answer would change the way Owen looked at him. He knew that immediately. I manage several family businesses. Restaurants, among other things. That explains the suit. What is wrong with my suit? Owen smiled. Nothing. It probably costs more than my semester textbooks. Mateo could not deny it. They walked toward the entrance together. Outside, the city was bright beneath the cold evening sky, and Owen stopped near the subway stairs. Well, Mateo with the mysterious family businesses, thanks for the coffee I already paid for. I failed badly at buying you coffee. You can recover. Mateo looked at him. Does that mean I will see you again? Owen considered him for just long enough to make the answer matter. Maybe. Then he reached into his backpack, pulled out a receipt, wrote something on the back, and handed it over. Do not make me regret this. Mateo looked down at the phone number. By the time he raised his eyes, Owen was already descending the stairs. Mateo remained on the sidewalk holding the receipt, realizing that for the first time in years, someone had given him something he could not have obtained through money, reputation, or influence. Owen had given him a choice to call, and more importantly, the freedom to be ignored if he did. Mateo waited until noon the next day before calling, which was 11 hours longer than he wanted to wait, and apparently still too soon for Owen. You lasted less than 24 hours, Owen said when he answered. Should I hang up and try again tomorrow? That would make it worse. Then I made the correct decision. Owen laughed. You are very confident for someone who failed to buy me coffee. Mateo looked across his office at the Manhattan skyline. 3 men were waiting outside for a meeting, but for once he did not care that his schedule was slipping. Give me another opportunity. Coffee. Coffee. Nothing expensive. Mateo paused. Define expensive. That pause concerns me. 2 days later, they met at a small cafe near Owen's university. Mateo arrived without a driver waiting at the curb and deliberately chose a plain dark coat, instead of the tailored suits people associated with him. Owen was already there with architectural drawings spread across the table. You actually came somewhere without white tablecloths, he said. I am adaptable. We will see. Matteo bought 2 ordinary coffees and returned to the table. Owen immediately reached for his wallet. I invited you, Matteo said. It is $4. Exactly. I can survive the financial impact. Owen accepted that with a smile. Their 30-minute coffee became 90 minutes. Owen explained a design project for affordable housing, pointing to sketches of shared courtyards and wide entrances. Matteo understood real estate better than Owen knew, and several times he nearly offered contacts, funding, or introductions. Each time he stopped himself. Owen was not asking to be rescued. He was asking to be heard. Why architecture? Matteo asked. Owen traced one line on the drawing. My mother moved us around a lot when I was younger. Some apartments made you feel temporary the second you walked inside. I want to design places that do the opposite. Matteo studied him. Places that tell people they belong. Owen looked up. Exactly. Matteo realized that was the moment attraction became something more dangerous. Beauty could catch attention. Respect made a person stay. Over the next 2 weeks, they met 3 more times. Once for coffee, once at a public architecture exhibit, and once for sandwiches after Owen finished a bookstore shift. Matteo never sent gifts. He never offered tuition money. When Owen complained about the cost of drafting supplies, Matteo simply listened, even though solving the problem would have taken 1 phone call. Owen seemed to notice the restraint. You are not very good at being casually rich, he said one evening. What does that mean? You look personally offended every time I compare prices. I am learning. Slowly. Matteo smiled. Be patient. Their differences were becoming impossible to ignore. Owen checked subway times before leaving anywhere. Matteo instinctively checked exits. Owen worried about scholarship deadlines. Matteo received calls from executives who addressed him with unusual caution. Owen still believed those calls belonged to ordinary family businesses. Matteo told himself he would explain everything when the timing was right. The excuse sounded weaker each time he used it. One Friday evening, they entered a quiet Italian bakery in Little Italy after visiting an exhibit. The owner looked up, saw Matteo, and immediately straightened. Mr. Romano. Matteo gave him a warning glance too subtle for Owen to notice. 2 coffees, please. Of course. Anything you want. Owen waited until they sat down. That keeps happening. What does? People acting like the mayor walked in. I have known his family for years. You know everybody's family. Matteo took a sip of coffee. Italian community. Owen narrowed his eyes. Mysterious family businesses. Restaurant owners who suddenly become nervous. Expensive suits. You are either secretly famous or incredibly difficult. Which explanation do you prefer? I am still investigating. Matteo smiled, but unease settled beneath it. Outside the window, a black sedan stopped at the curb. A man Matteo recognized stepped out, noticed him through the glass, and immediately entered the bakery. He approached their table but stopped several feet away. Don Romano, he said respectfully. I apologize. I did not know you were occupied. Owen's smile disappeared. Matteo slowly set down his coffee. The room suddenly felt much quieter. Owen looked from the stranger to Matteo. Don Romano, he repeated. Matteo knew the moment he had postponed had finally arrived, and judging by Owen's expression, the truth was no longer going to wait for permission. Owen waited until the stranger had apologized again and left the bakery before speaking. I am guessing Don is not your middle name. Matteo looked across the table at him. The humor in Owen's voice could not hide the caution that had replaced his easy expression. No, then explain it. Matteo had negotiated with men who arrived at meetings determined to challenge every word he said, but none of those conversations had made him choose his next sentence this carefully. My family businesses are real. The restaurants, real estate, shipping interests, all of it. Owen folded his arms. That sounds like the beginning of an answer. It is. Matteo lowered his voice. The Romano organization also has influence outside those businesses. My family has operated that way for generations. Owen stared at him. You are talking around the word. Matteo held his gaze. Mafia. Owen went completely still. The bakery continued around them, cups touching saucers and quiet conversations filling the room, yet their table seemed separated from everything else. And you run it? Yes. Owen looked toward the front window, then back at Matteo. So when people get nervous around you, it is not because you are difficult. I can also be difficult. Owen did not smile. Mateo immediately regretted trying to soften the moment. How long were you planning to wait before telling me? Owen asked. I was going to tell you. When? Mateo had no answer that would make the truth better. Soon. Owen nodded slowly. That is not a date. I know. We have met 4 times. I know. You know where I work. You know where I study. You know things about my family. I asked what you did the first night. Mateo felt the accusation because it was deserved. I told you part of the truth. That is the problem. Owen reached for his backpack. Mateo resisted the instinct to stop him. Owen, sit for another minute. Owen looked at him. Was that a request or an order? The question landed harder than Mateo expected. A request. Owen remained standing. Then my answer is no. Mateo nodded once. All right. Owen seemed surprised that Mateo did not argue. He put on his jacket, but did not leave immediately. Do you know what bothers me most? Tell me. You like that I treated you normally. Mateo said nothing. Owen continued. You like that I did not recognize your name, that I made jokes about your suit, that I refused your car. You got to experience being just Mateo. Yes, but I did not get the same choice. Mateo's expression tightened. What do you mean? You knew exactly who I was. A student working part-time, worried about tuition, taking the subway home. I thought you were a rich businessman with a complicated family. Those are not equal amounts of information. Mateo could not deny it. You are right. Owen looked almost frustrated by the answer. Do not agree with me because you think it will keep me here. I am agreeing because you are right. Then you should have told me. Yes. Owen adjusted the strap of his backpack. I need time. Mateo wanted to ask how much. A day, a week, a month. He wanted a schedule because schedules could be managed. Instead, he said, take it. Owen walked toward the door, then stopped. And do not have someone follow me. Mateo's jaw tightened. I will not. Do not call my school. Do not contact my boss. Do not solve anything in my life because you think it gives you a reason to see me. Mateo understood then how clearly Owen had already seen the difference between their worlds. I will not interfere. Owen studied him as though deciding whether his word meant anything. Good. Then he left. Mateo remained at the table with 2 unfinished coffees between them. His phone vibrated twice. He ignored it. For years, the Romano name had opened doors before Mateo reached them. One conversation could arrange meetings, change schedules, or make complicated problems disappear. Owen had just given him a problem none of that power could solve. Mateo could find out where Owen would be tomorrow. He could create an accidental meeting. He could send something expensive enough to demand acknowledgement. He could make himself impossible to ignore. Instead, Mateo took out his phone, opened Owen's contact, and stared at the number. Then he locked the screen without calling. For the first time since they met, the only honest thing Mateo could give Owen was distance, and if he wanted another chance, he would have to prove he understood that no amount of power entitled him to one. For 11 days, Mateo did exactly what Owen had asked him to do. He did not call. He did not send flowers, arrange a convenient meeting, contact the bookstore, or ask anyone in the Romano organization for information. That last restraint surprised the people around him most. Mateo was accustomed to knowing what happened inside his world before anyone needed to tell him. But Owen had drawn a boundary, and Mateo refused to turn concern into surveillance. On the 12th morning, his cousin Anthony entered Mateo's office carrying several business folders and casually mentioned that a university scholarship committee had requested financial documentation from students after an administrative system error. One of those schools near Washington Square, Anthony said. Mateo's attention sharpened immediately. Which university? Anthony named Owen's school. Mateo looked toward his phone. He knew Owen depended on his scholarship. He also knew administrators, donors, and attorneys who could probably make a paperwork problem disappear before lunch. Do you need me to call someone? Anthony asked. Mateo closed the folder in front of him. No, Anthony stared at him. You asked which school. I did. And now you do not care? Mateo looked at him. I care enough not to interfere. That afternoon, Owen stood in a campus financial aid office holding a notice that threatened to delay his scholarship renewal because one income document had been incorrectly marked as missing. He had already submitted it twice. The employee behind the desk apologized, but explained that the appeal deadline was Friday. Owen left frustrated, calculating how many bookstore shifts he would need if the payment was delayed. His phone felt unusually heavy in his pocket. Mateo could probably solve this with one conversation. That was precisely why Owen refused to call him. 2 days later, Owen was working at the bookstore when a familiar voice asked, "Where would I find a book about buildings designed by people who hate straight lines?" Owen looked up. Matteo stood on the other side of the counter holding a paperback he clearly had no intention of buying. Owen's expression tightened. "Are you following me?" Matteo immediately shook his head. "No. I came because you told me where you worked before you asked for distance. I can leave." Owen studied him. "Why are you here?" "Because 12 days felt long enough to ask one question." "Which question?" "Are you willing to talk to me?" Owen hesitated, then glanced toward the clock. "My break is in 10 minutes. I can wait." They met outside beside a small public plaza. Matteo kept several feet between them. "I heard your university had a financial aid system problem," he said. Owen's eyes narrowed. "How?" "Someone mentioned the university during an unrelated conversation. I asked which school. That is all." "Did you call anyone?" "No." "Did anyone working for you call anyone?" "No." Owen searched his face. "You could fix it." "Probably." "And you did not. You specifically told me not to solve things in your life." Owen looked away. "I am appealing it myself." "Good. That is all you are going to say?" Matteo almost smiled. "Would you prefer a lecture?" "I expected an offer. I wanted to make one." Owen looked back at him. "Why did you not?" Matteo answered without hesitation. "Because wanting to help you does not give me permission to take control." The anger Owen had carried since the bakery did not disappear, but something inside it shifted. "The appeal instructions are confusing," he admitted. Matteo remained careful. "Do you want help understanding them?" "Understanding. Not fixing. Your rules." Owen pulled a folded notice from his backpack and handed it over. Matteo read it slowly. "There is a public student advocacy office listed here. They can review appeals before submission." He pointed to the bottom of the page. "You do not need me. You need an appointment with them." Owen took the notice back. "You really are going to make me do this myself?" "I think you were always going to do it yourself." For the first time in 12 days, Owen smiled at him. It was small, cautious, and nothing close to forgiveness. Matteo valued it anyway. "My break is almost over," Owen said. "Then I should go." Matteo turned away before Owen had to ask. "Matteo." He stopped. Owen held up the notice. "Thank you." Matteo looked at him. "For what?" "For finally understanding the difference between helping and taking over." Matteo nodded and walked toward the corner. Behind him, Owen returned to the bookstore carrying the same problem he had brought outside, but something fundamental had changed. Matteo had possessed the power to remove the obstacle and had chosen instead to respect Owen's right to face it himself. For a man accustomed to proving strength through action, doing nothing without permission might have been the hardest choice he had ever made. Owen won his scholarship appeal on Friday afternoon without a single phone call from Matteo Romano. The student advocacy office helped him organize the documents. The financial aid committee corrected the administrative error, and the confirmation email arrived while Owen was standing behind the bookstore counter. His first reaction was relief. His second surprised him. He wanted to tell Matteo. Owen stared at the contact on his phone for almost a minute before sending a simple message. "The scholarship is safe." Matteo replied less than 30 seconds later. "I knew you could handle it." No celebration dinner appeared in the next message. No expensive gift arrived at the bookstore. Matteo only added, "I am glad they corrected the mistake." Owen smiled despite himself. That evening, he asked whether Matteo wanted coffee. They met the following afternoon at the same small cafe near campus where Matteo had first listened to Owen explain his architecture project. This time Owen arrived first, bought both coffees, and placed one across the table. "For dollars," he said when Matteo sat down. "Try not to become dependent on my generosity." Matteo looked at the cup. "This changes everything. Do not get emotional." For a few minutes, the conversation felt almost like it had before the bakery. Then Owen became serious. "I have questions." Matteo nodded. "Ask them. And I want complete answers." "You will have them." Owen asked about the Romano family, the organization Matteo controlled, and why people treated him with such caution. Matteo answered without romanticizing his position. He described a family structure built over generations around loyalty, influence, private agreements, legitimate businesses, and a reputation that carried consequences even when Matteo personally preferred negotiation over intimidation. He did not offer details that could place Owen inside matters that did not concern him. More importantly, he did not pretend the name was harmless. So you understand why I needed distance, Owen said. Yes. Does that bother you? The distance bothered me. Your reason for needing it did not. Owen looked down at his coffee. That sounds annoyingly reasonable. I have been practicing. I noticed. Matteo hesitated before asking, why did you invite me today? Owen considered the question. Because you could have interfered with my scholarship, and you did not. Because you could have appeared at my school every day, and you did not. Because when I told you no, you eventually treated it like a complete sentence. Matteo absorbed that quietly. Owen continued, that does not erase the fact that you hid something important. I know. Trust does not reset because you behaved correctly for 2 weeks. I know that too. Stop agreeing with everything. Matteo almost smiled. I disagree with that request. Owen laughed, and the tension eased. They left the cafe an hour later and walked several blocks toward Washington Square Park. The afternoon was cold but bright, and students moved around them carrying backpacks and coffee cups. Nobody here seemed to recognize Matteo. Owen noticed that Matteo appeared almost relieved by the anonymity. Can I ask something less serious? Owen said. Please. Why me? Matteo glanced at him. What do you mean? That first night, you were sitting with someone sophisticated, wealthy, and probably approved by your entire family. I was doing homework with a $6 coffee I refused to throw away. Matteo stopped walking. Owen stopped beside him. You really want the answer? I would not have asked otherwise. Matteo looked toward the trees before returning his gaze to Owen. I noticed you before Vanessa sat down. Owen blinked. Before your date even started? Yes. Why? Matteo could have said Owen was attractive. It was true, but it was not the answer. You were completely absorbed in your work. Then that older man dropped his papers, and you stopped what you were doing immediately. You helped him when you believed nobody important was watching. Owen was quiet. That was it. That was the first moment. First moment of what? Matteo took a breath. Wanting to know you. Owen studied him carefully. That is different from knowing me. Very different. Matteo nodded. I understand that now. Owen resumed walking. After several steps, Matteo joined him, keeping pace rather than leading. For the record, Owen said, I noticed you before we spoke too. Matteo turned toward him. You did. Everyone noticed you. That is considerably less flattering. Owen smiled. You looked miserable on your blind date. I was distracted. By architecture? By an architecture student. Owen shook his head, but the smile remained. They reached the entrance to the park, where their paths normally separated. Matteo did not ask when he would see Owen again. He had learned that some answers mattered more when they were freely offered. Owen walked several steps away, then turned around. I am working until 6 on Tuesday. Matteo waited. There is an architecture exhibit downtown that closes at 9. Matteo smiled. Are you inviting me? Owen adjusted his backpack. I am giving you an opportunity not to ruin this. Matteo nodded. Tuesday at 6. Owen turned away again, leaving Matteo with something more valuable than forgiveness. It was another chance, smaller and more fragile than the first, but this time Matteo understood exactly what made it worth protecting. Tuesday evening arrived with cold rain and crowded sidewalks, but Matteo was standing outside the bookstore at exactly 6. Owen emerged carrying his backpack and stopped when he saw him beneath the awning. No car. Owen asked. You said the exhibit is downtown. That does not answer my question. Matteo lifted a subway card between 2 fingers. I am expanding my education. Owen laughed. This I need to see. 20 minutes later, Matteo stood inside a crowded subway car holding an overhead rail while Owen tried not to look amused. You look offended, Owen said. A man stepped on my shoe. Welcome to public transportation. He did not apologize. You survived. Matteo looked down at the polished leather. Barely. The architecture exhibit occupied a renovated warehouse near the waterfront, filled with models showing how abandoned industrial buildings could become affordable apartments, libraries, and community spaces. Owen came alive the moment they entered. He explained why one design worked and another only looked impressive from a distance. Matteo listened, asking questions instead of pretending expertise. Halfway through the exhibit, Owen stopped before a model of an old factory converted into housing around a central courtyard. This is what I meant, he said. A building can tell people they belong before anyone speaks to them. Matteo remembered the sentence from their first coffee. You want to design places that welcome people. Owen looked surprised. You remembered. I remember most things you tell me. For once, Owen had no joke ready. They continued walking until they reached a student competition display. Owen slowed in front of a notice announcing applications for a summer design fellowship in Chicago. Mateo saw the change in his expression. You want it? Everyone in my program wants it. Then apply. Owen gave him a sideways look. That sounded dangerously close to an order. Professional advice from a man who knows almost nothing about architecture. Better. Owen read the requirements. Travel and housing are partly covered, but not everything. Mateo immediately thought of 5 ways to solve that problem. He said none of them. Owen noticed. You almost offered money. I did. But you stopped. I am becoming remarkably disciplined. Owen smiled. Maybe there is hope for you. They left the exhibit shortly before 9 and walked toward the river instead of immediately returning to the subway. The rain had stopped, leaving the pavement bright beneath the city lights. Owen leaned against the railing and looked across the water. Can I ask you something? Always. When you said you noticed me before your date started, were you serious? Mateo stood beside him. Completely. You did not even know my name. No, then what exactly did you feel? Mateo considered the question. Interest first, then curiosity. Then I watched you help that older man. Owen waited. And for several seconds I forgot why I had entered the restaurant. Owen looked down, almost embarrassed. That sounds suspiciously dramatic. I am Italian. That is not a legal defense. Mateo laughed. Owen turned toward him again. People call things love at first sight because it sounds romantic. I do not know if I believe in that. Neither do I. Owen seemed surprised. You do not. I believe you can see someone and feel that meeting them might matter. Love requires knowing what they are afraid of, what makes them angry, what they refuse to compromise, and whether they still want you around after they learn the parts of you that are difficult. Owen was silent for several seconds. You learned that last part the hard way. Yes. And you still think this might matter? Mateo met his eyes. More now than I did that first night. Owen looked toward the river again. I am still not ready to pretend everything is fixed. I am not asking you to. Good. Owen shifted his backpack higher on his shoulder. But I do trust you more than I did 2 weeks ago. Mateo understood how much the admission cost him. Thank you. Owen smiled faintly. Do not make it weird. I was planning an emotional speech. Save it. They started back toward the subway together. At the entrance, Owen paused. I am applying for the fellowship. Mateo nodded. Good. And if I get it, I am going to Chicago. Mateo felt the instinctive resistance immediately, followed by something more important. Owen was watching him, waiting to see whether affection would become control. Mateo smiled. Then I hope Chicago is ready for you. Owen's expression softened. He descended the first step, then turned back. You are getting better at this. At what? Letting me choose. Mateo watched him disappear into the station and realized that Owen was right. For most of his life, Mateo had measured power by how much he could influence. Now the person who mattered most was teaching him another definition. Sometimes power meant having every opportunity to control an outcome and choosing not to. 3 weeks later, Owen received the email while sitting in the same cafe where Mateo had first learned that $4 coffee could apparently be considered a financial victory. He read the first sentence twice before believing it. The Chicago Fellowship had accepted him. His first instinct was to call his mother. His second was to call Mateo, and that realization made him sit very still. Mateo answered after the first ring. Owen, I got it. There was a brief silence. The fellowship? Yes. Mateo's voice changed immediately. Congratulations. Owen smiled. That is all. Would you prefer fireworks? I expected at least one dramatic Italian reaction. I am trying to respect public safety. Owen laughed. I leave in June. Then Chicago gets you in June. No hesitation. No attempt to make him reconsider. Owen looked through the cafe window at students crossing the street. Are you disappointed? That you succeeded? That I am leaving for the summer? Mateo answered carefully. I will miss you. Those are not the same thing. Something about the distinction stayed with Owen for the rest of the day. That evening they met at Bella Vita for the first time since the night everything began. Mateo had suggested 3 other restaurants, but Owen chose this one. Why here? Mateo asked as they entered. I wanted to see whether you still become distracted by architecture students. Only one. Owen shook his head. They did not take Mateo's old table. Instead, they sat in the quieter cafe section near the window where Owen had once spread textbooks around a $6 coffee. For several minutes they talked about Chicago, housing arrangements, and the projects Owen might work on. Then Owen closed the fellowship information on his phone. There is something I never finished asking you. Mateo waited. That night at the river, you said you noticed me before your date arrived. Yes. But noticing someone is easy. Why did you keep coming back? Mateo looked toward the window as if the answer had been waiting there since their first meeting. At first, I thought it was because you treated me normally. Owen listened. Most people decide who Mateo Romano is before I speak. You did not. I like that. And now I know that was selfish. Owen raised an eyebrow. Explain. I wanted the freedom to be ordinary around you, while keeping information that would have helped you decide whether you wanted to be around me at all. Owen said nothing. Mateo continued. After you learned the truth, I thought losing you would prove that honesty had been a mistake. Did it? No. It proved delaying honesty was the mistake. Owen looked down at his coffee. That is a better answer. Mateo smiled faintly. I have had several weeks to think about it. So what changed? Mateo leaned back. You did not. Owen looked up. You were still stubborn about paying for coffee. Still worried about tuition. Still excited about buildings nobody else noticed. Still willing to tell me when I was wrong. I stopped wanting you because you made me feel ordinary. I started caring about you because you never changed yourself to make me comfortable. Owen remained quiet for several seconds. You know what frightened me? My family. Partly. But mostly the possibility that I was interesting to you only because I was different from the people around you. Mateo nodded slowly. That would have been unfair. Yes. Then I should say this clearly. Mateo met his eyes. The first night, I was fascinated by you. I did not love you because I did not know you. Everything that came afterward is why my feelings changed. Owen's expression softened. Into what? Mateo could have answered immediately, but he refused to turn the moment into another declaration Owen had not asked to carry. Something serious enough that I would rather wait than pressure you into naming it. Owen smiled. You really have changed. A little. Do not become too proud. Mateo laughed. Outside, Manhattan moved beneath the evening lights exactly as it had the night they met, but almost everything between them was different. Owen knew the truth now. He knew Mateo's power, his mistakes, and the parts of his world that made Owen cautious. Mateo knew Owen could leave for Chicago, build a future independent of him, and choose a life that did not revolve around the Romano name. Neither man was protected by ignorance anymore. Owen reached across the table and rested his hand beside Mateo's without touching it. When I come back from Chicago, he said, ask me on a real first date. Mateo looked at the small distance between their hands. A real first date? No blind dates. No hidden truths. No mysterious family businesses. That seems unusually demanding. Owen smiled. Can you handle it? Mateo turned his hand palm upward, stopping before contact. Owen looked at it for a moment, then placed his hand in Mateo's by choice. Ask me in September, he said. Mateo gently closed his fingers around Owen's hand. September, he promised. September arrived with cooler mornings, crowded sidewalks, and one message waiting on Owen's phone before his flight from Chicago had even landed in New York. Welcome home. I remember my promise. Owen smiled at the screen, but made Mateo wait until the following Saturday. The summer had changed him in quiet ways. He had worked beside architects he once knew only from magazines, helped develop plans for community housing, and learned that he could build a future far beyond the limits he had once imagined. Mateo had never appeared unexpectedly in Chicago. He had never offered to pay Owen's expenses or used his connections to enter the fellowship world. They had spoken regularly, sometimes for an hour and sometimes for 5 minutes. But Mateo had allowed Owen's summer to belong entirely to Owen. On Saturday evening, Owen walked into Bella Vita and immediately saw Mateo standing near the entrance. No private security surrounded him. No business associates occupied nearby tables. Mateo wore a dark suit because, as Owen had learned, convincing him not to dress formally for dinner was apparently impossible. You came, Mateo said. Owen raised an eyebrow. You sound surprised. I learned not to assume your answer. That might be the smartest thing I taught you. Mateo smiled and led him toward the cafe section. Owen stopped when he saw the table beside the window. It was the same table where he had studied on the night they met. A single small lamp illuminated the polished surface. There were no flowers, expensive gifts, or extravagant surprises. Just 2 chairs and 2 cups of coffee. Owen looked at Matteo. $6 coffee? Inflation. It is 7 now. Owen laughed. Tragic. Matteo pulled out the chair across from him, then paused. Before you sit, I need to ask you something. Owen waited. Matteo seemed more nervous than Owen had ever seen him, which was remarkable considering the number of powerful people who treated the Romano name with careful respect. You know who I am now, Matteo said. You know about my family, my responsibilities, and the mistakes I made when I first met you. You also know I cannot promise that my life will ever be simple. Owen nodded. I know, and I know who you are. You are not someone waiting for me to provide a future. You are building one yourself. Matteo glanced at the chair and then back at Owen. So, Owen Parker, knowing everything you know now, would you like to go on a first date with me? Owen let the silence last several seconds simply because Matteo deserved a little suffering. You realize we have already had coffee about 20 times. Those were complicated preliminary meetings. We went to an architecture exhibit. Research. We held hands at this exact restaurant. Negotiations. Owen laughed so hard that 2 people at a nearby table glanced over. Matteo finally relaxed. Owen pulled out the chair and sat down. Yes. Matteo remained standing. Yes. Do not make me repeat it. I waited all summer. I think repetition is reasonable. Owen shook his head. Yes, Matteo. I would like to go on a first date with you. Matteo sat across from him, and something about the simplicity of the moment made Owen unexpectedly emotional. Months earlier, he had occupied this same corner with an old laptop, architecture textbooks, and no idea that a stranger across the restaurant had noticed him. Back then, Matteo had known Owen's name before Owen knew anything meaningful about him. Now there were no hidden identities between them. Matteo knew about the scholarship worries, the bookstore shifts, the architecture dreams, and the stubborn independence Owen refused to surrender. Owen knew the weight carried by the Romano name and understood that caring about Matteo did not require surrendering control of his own life. Was it really that first night? Owen asked quietly. Was what? The moment you knew I mattered. Matteo considered his answer. That was the moment I wanted to know you. Everything afterward taught me why you mattered. Owen smiled. Better answer. I had all summer to prepare. Their coffee arrived, and Owen lifted his cup. To your first successful blind date. Matteo touched his cup gently against Owen's. This is not a blind date. Exactly. Later, when they stepped outside, Matteo did not summon a car or decide where they should go next. He simply stood beside Owen beneath the Manhattan lights. What now? He asked. Owen looked down the avenue, then toward Matteo. Walk with me. Matteo offered his hand without taking Owen's. Owen looked at it and remembered the man who once believed power meant controlling every outcome. Then he placed his hand in Matteo's. They started walking at Owen's pace. 2 men who had first met through an accident neither could have planned and reached this moment through choices neither could make for the other. Matteo had noticed Owen at first sight, but what grew between them had required something far more difficult than instant attraction. It required truth, patience, distance, change, and the courage to let another person remain free. Owen gently tightened his hand around Matteo's, and Matteo smiled without looking away from him. For the first time since the night they met, neither of them needed another chance to begin. They had finally chosen the same beginning together.